I'm dead, but not completely dead. Looking at himself in the broken full-length mirror, Na Yuan muttered to himself. If a person's chest cavity is cut open and the blood is drained, then in his original world, Beelzebub cannot be rescued while he is alive. But in this world, it seems that anything is possible. That's right, Na Yuan is not an aborigines in this strange world. He comes from an azure planet. According to his own memory, in order to get the performance bonus yesterday, he worked late at night and was so tired that he went home and fell asleep. But when he woke up again, he had a different body and was in a shabby house in this other world. The ground inside the house was a little messy, with signs of fighting, but strangely there was no blood, which seemed to be inconsistent with his squeezed dry body. But one thing is obvious, he must be the one who was beaten, and the battle ended quickly. Because the messy traces were only maintained within a 2-meter radius, which proved that the original owner of this body was subdued without fluttering twice. But why did you steal my heart? Na Yuan touched his empty chest and whispered to himself. There were 5 or 6 black sutures, crisscrossed and crisscrossed, covering up the terrifying wound about 20 centimeters long in the chest cavity. Someone stole his heart. Don't forget to close the door. Na Yuan tried to stretch out a finger and dig into the seam. The sticky feeling came, but the inside was very loose and lacked firmness. He pulled out his finger, and there was a bit of transparent mucus on it, which should be tissue fluid secreted by the wound, but the only thing was a bright red without blood. This proves that he really didn't have a drop, and the blood from all parts of his body was completely drained by some kind of strange force, so that not even a single strand of the inner wall of his chest remained. It's too miserable, fortunately it doesn't hurt. Otherwise, I might as well be in the original world, saddling the lovely boss. He didn't even die when his body was hollowed out. If he had to have a clear sense of pain, he might not even be able to do self-transcendence. He couldn't immediately faint from pain, then wake up from pain, then faint from pain, and then wake up from pain. He can feel that his sense of touch still exists, at least he knows that he has touched something, and he will not be unconscious. As for the pain, it should be replaced by numbness, because whether it's on the chest or the sporadic scars on the body, the feedback to myself is all the feeling of numbness, like being overdosed on painkillers, and like eating hot pot when I bite the peppercorns, the feeling brought by my lips. At this moment, he has been in this world for most of the day, and when he woke up, he got up from the fragments of the full-length mirror all over the floor. In the dazed and flustered emotions, it took a long time to reluctantly accept the pale, shadowy, and handsome new face in the mirror. Forcibly suppressing his heart, oh no, it should be the treacherous emotions in his mind, Na Yuan turned around, and rummaged through the scattered objects in the house, trying to find some useful clues. However, he didn't find any identity information of this body from these things, but a few job profiles and newspapers scattered on the table gave him some understanding of the world. The text in the other world is that Na Yuan has never seen hieroglyphs before, but he can still easily understand the content above. Although he did not inherit the memory of this body, maybe he is just like the Blue Star amnesia patient, who can also be familiar with the skills he learned before he lost his memory, such as driving, cooking, and literacy. These instincts have been integrated with this body, and absorbed by Na Yuan's soul. I saw a headline on the front page of a newspaper, Tremble, Sewer Tumors, the Metropolitan Church Research Institute, successfully extracted the elements from anger to eliminate evil poisons. In the future, the maliciousness hidden in the dark may be invisible. And the 2 meniscus outside the window, one big and one small, plated the streets with a deep and hazy silver grey. Everything seemed to indicate that the world of another world was completely different from the world that I understood. After flipping through the pages on the table, Na Yuan was inexplicably attracted by the bookstore recruitment introduction. Compared with other newspapers, the above text has no eye-catching content. This is a job advertisement that is so ordinary that it can no longer be ordinary. But when he set his eyes on it, an indescribable touch continued to emerge in Na Yuan's mind, as if his body instincts were urgently telling himself that he should go to this place. Turning over the crumpled job description, you can see 3 lines of words scrawled on it: ancient calling, the hatred that the Black Sea and the Ice Ocean cannot extinguish. Stalwart recovery. Intuition told Na Yuan that this was the handwriting of the previous owner of the body. The handwriting is really in the same line as the self in the previous life. There is a kind of wild abstract beauty, only I can understand it. In other words, it is a ghost painting a peach talisman. Yu reading www.yuuganshu.com is a piece of material to be a doctor. So much so that some fonts are so confusing that Na Yuan feels that in a few days, he might not even know himself, and people can't help but wonder if it's just graffiti or deliberately. Seeing these 3 lines, the throbbing in Na Yuan's mind became even stronger. It seemed that there was something unfinished that had to be done. This kind of feeling is very wonderful. It does not make people feel scared or resisted, but more like a guide that is sent from the soul and is willing to follow. Na Yuan's eyes looked out the window. Several strange buildings stood quietly in the dark night. Below the buildings was a street paved with blue stone blocks. There were several street lamps sparsely arranged on both sides of the street. The surroundings were illuminated, and from time to time there were several unknown blackbirds circling on the street lights, and the shadows were pulled by the lights, and they were swimming deformed on the ground. Looking along the street to the end, the sparse street lights are getting farther and farther, the road is deep and the end is unknown. A strong sense of sight told Na Yuan that as long as he walked along this street, he would be able to find a place where his soul would guide him. Are you going or not? It seems that there is no need for entanglement, because apart from following this throbbing, I have no better choice now. In his previous life, as an orphan who came out of the starting point orphanage, Na Yuan failed to do a few deeds worthy of boasting, and did not leave any fetters or regrets. For some unknown reason, I accidentally came to such a strange world, and I have been at a loss for a long time. If you still don't dare to go out and face it, then you are blind and have another chance. Boom! 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 Suddenly, a dull knock on the door pulled Na Yuan, who was looking out of the window, who was throbbing uncontrollably, and successfully startled him. In such a strange world, the sudden violent knock on the door in the middle of the night can really scare people out of myocardial infarction. Fortunately, Na Yuan had no heart, and quickly reacted. The information obtained from the various pages on the table before told Na Yuan that now at least it can be determined that where he is currently is a safe area in this world. Therefore, there are usually no monsters with claws, and the bridge to break in the middle of the night. He quickly put on the inner lining and put on the grey windbreaker hanging on the hanger, completely covering the wound on his body. Then he was in a hurry and was about to open the door. At this time, he could hear the sound of the keychain colliding. It should be because there was no answer at the door, and people outside were looking for spare keys. Click! Taking the first step, Na Yuan opened the door, and saw a plump aunt in her 50s with a keychain, short red wavy curly hair, and loose black pajamas. This person is not easy to mess with. This was Na Yuan's first reaction. Sure enough, the moment Na Yuan appeared, the plump aunt showed a shrewish spirit, pointed at Na Yuan's nose and scolded, "Did I say you are a mangy dog that can't be driven away? I haven't paid rent for 3 days, and they told me to check out at noon today, but when I woke up, you haven't left yet? Do you still want me to return the deposit?" Saying that, the middle-aged shrew saw something from the crack of the door, pushed Na Yuan away in disbelief, pushed the half-closed door completely open, looked at the fragments of the full-length mirror there, and said in shock, It's crazy to let someone like you come to rent it." When he opened the door, he was sprayed on his head and face, and Na Yuan was also confused at the moment. The situation he was in and his subconsciousness told him that the shrew in front of him should be his landlord. I just didn't expect the original body to be so miserable. He couldn't even pay the rent for 3 days. This is not the point. The landlord aunt just said that at noon today, she swore that she would check out. So it means that at that time, you were still jumping around? You must know that when you came to this world, the sunlight outside the window told Na Yuan that it was not long in the afternoon. So what happened in such a short period of time to make you what you are now? Na Yuan just wanted to ask him about his situation at noon, but the shrew ant didn't give him any room to ask questions, and pointed to the corridor with dangerous eyes, and said, "Let's go now. If the deposit is real, don't want to go back." In this way, Na Yuan came to this world inexplicably with a stomach full of doubts and depression, and in the middle of the night, he was inexplicably kicked out, sleeping on an inexplicable street. Walking alone on the treacherous street with the swaying street lights, wrapped in a thick windbreaker, but it could not bring me the slightest warmth, and now wrapping Na Yuan tightly, except for the cold wind in the middle of the night and the unknown bird. The strange screams of this kind are only the endless sense of weakness that comes from the depths of the body. He felt that his body was very light, only weighing 70 to 80 pounds, like a walking skin and bones. There was no blood flow in the body, but the remaining tissue fluid was supporting his internal organs and skin strangely, making it not like the mummy shrivels like that. The cold wind is blowing head on, and I am like a candle in the wind. I can only sway with the wind, and I don't know when it will be extinguished. At this moment, what drives Na Yuan's actions is only the throbbing in the dark. It seems that his soul is guiding him on the way forward. It seems that as long as he goes to that place, he will be able to figure out all this and find his own peace. He put the bookstore recruitment introduction that touched him in the inner pocket of his windbreaker. He didn't take it out to compare the address, but Na Yuan subconsciously knew how to find it. It seems that you have stepped on this road countless times, or is this body born with a mission? Following his body's instinct, Na Yuan crossed 2 deserted streets and came to a shop with dim lights. Looking up, a line of quaint characters is written on the dark brown wooden signboard, "Barker Bookstore." It's really a bookstore. It turns out that the information in the recruitment introduction is true, but why does such a bookstore attract you so much, and it is still open so late? Na Yuan couldn't think about it so much. At this moment, he only had a sense of relief, as if he had gone through a lot of hardships and finally found what he was looking for. Crunch! Without any hesitation, Na Yuan pushed open the door and entered. The door of the bookstore made a sound of disrepair. It was especially harsh in the silent late night. It also successfully attracted the attention of a woman at the counter in the store who seemed to be dozing off. The woman raised her head, revealing her face that had been covered by shadows before. This was a beautiful woman. Her delicate face could not be concealed by her messy blonde hair. Her lazy temperament was swept away after being disturbed by Na Yuan, who suddenly entered the door. With a faint gleam in her eyes, she looked up at the uninvited guest in front of her with a hesitant expression. After staring at Na Yuan for a while, the woman looked at him and said, "Guest, it's already very late." Na Yuan didn't know what he should answer, so he nodded mechanically and said, "It's really late." The woman frowned, and there was a hint of alertness in her eyes, and said, "It's so late, what are you doing here?" These words stopped Na Yuan from asking. He didn't know what he was doing here, so the atmosphere fell into silence. Until the woman in front of him seemed to be touching something under the counter, Na Yuan had no reason to feel a sense of crisis, and then he said truthfully, "I came here under some kind of guidance, this is like my instinct and mission, can you understand?" Up to now, he can only try to describe his wonderful feelings, otherwise he really doesn't know where to start. "I didn't have any hope, but I didn't expect that." After Na Yuan said these words, the woman who had become more alert was stunned. She took back the dagger hidden under the counter and continued to look at Na Yuan strangely. Said, "What led you here?" Silence. Another long silence. "Then how do I know what guidance I came from? I'm so confused, how can I explain it to you?" "That." With a grunt, Na Yuan reached out and wanted to take out the recruitment profile in his inner pocket. Maybe the scribbled content on it could help the situation in front of him. Reading www.yuyugonshu.com. However, When his palm touched the crumpled job description, an inspiration suddenly flashed through Nai Yuan's mind. He retracted his palm in a daze, looked at the uncertain woman in front of him, and said tentatively, "Ancient call." Hearing this, the blonde woman seemed to have an amazing arrogance. She stood up for a moment, looked at Nai Yuan with burning eyes, and asked with a little anticipation in her tone, "Are you affected by ancient times? The call to guide you?" Nai Yuan was a little confused when he saw the situation, but he tried his best to act as calm as possible, and said, "Yes." The woman continued to ask, "Do you still remember the source of that pain?" This time, Nai Yuan was very skilled in accepting it. He nodded with the same expression, and said, "The hatred that the Black Sea and the Ice Ocean can't extinguish. Of course I remember." He remembered a ghost, and it could be said that he had forgotten everything. Apart from leaving him a half-dead body, his memory, along with his blood, disappeared. The reason why I can speak right now is because I suddenly realized that the scribbled handwriting recorded on the back of the recruitment introduction is the secret code for the connection. Although I don't know who the connection person is in front of me, and what I will do after the connection, it seems that I can only go one way to the dark for the time being. Because the woman in front of her stood up excitedly just now, she revealed the dagger that was half-tucked in the leather scabbard at the bottom of the counter. Sen Han's blade made Nai Yuan's back feel cold. It turned out that the previous sense of crisis was not an illusion. The thing this woman was pulling under the counter was a Morian dagger. So as long as I said one wrong sentence, I might have died just now. "What kind of organization are you? Am I forced to board a pirate ship?" When he saw the Senyan dagger, Nai Yuan woke up suddenly, and the instinctual throbbing began to disappear, as if the body's final mission had been completed, and that thing called obsession, like the wind in the wind, crushed like catkins. He knew that he had already boarded the pirate ship, and there was no turning back for the time being. The woman who gave him a sense of crisis contained a certain sense of ceremony in her voice, and said, "The ancient years forgotten by the world will finally usher in recovery." Nai Yuan had to continue to cooperate with her performance, nodded and said, "Recovery of the Great Shore." At this point, the 3 secret codes recorded on the back of the recruitment introduction were all correct by Nai Yuan. Then he didn't know what to do next, he could only take one step at a time. The woman's expression gradually returned to normal, but the sense of solemn ceremony in her eyes did not dissipate at all. She showed a smile and came forward to hug Nai Yuan directly. With nephrite in his arms, Nai Yuan's body was a little stiff, he didn't know what to do. The woman smiled and said, "My name is Qiao Qi now, my dear, long time no see relatives, I'm very happy to be reunited with you, how about you?" Nai Yuan really couldn't remember the original name of this body, and didn't know why the woman who gave him a strong sense of crisis just now hugged him and called him a relative after he got the code. He had to hesitate for a while, then said, "Nai Yuan, my name is Nai Yuan now, my dear." "Qiao Qi." He is not called Nai Yuan now, but has been called Nai Yuan from beginning to end, but now that he can't figure out the situation, he can only speak according to the tone of the other party, which may make himself safer. Qiao Qi let go of her arms, looked at Nai Yuan's disguised poker face, smiled, and led him to the inner room of the bookstore, saying, "Nai Yuan, we've been waiting for you for a long time, come and play with everyone. Say hello." As she said that, Qiao Qi pushed open the closed door of the inner room, revealing a spacious room with numerous furnishings inside. I saw 5 people sitting in the room, 3 men and 2 women. After hearing the movement, they all raised their eyes and looked over. The scrutiny made Nai Yuan feel uneasy. At first glance, these people are not normal. There was a graceful, thinly dressed woman reclining on the sofa with a blanket over her body, as if she was dozing off, but Nai Yuan could clearly smell the strange herbal smell spreading from her. Under the blanket she was wearing, when Nai Yuan entered the door, a pair of deformed eyes suddenly appeared. Looking closer, it seemed to be a nest of poisonous insects, and there was a faint hissing sound like a poisonous snake spitting out a letter. There is an extremely burly man, who is at least 2 meters tall, his forearm can be thicker than Na Yuan's thigh, and the knotted muscles on the top are twisted together like a snake, making people no doubt the horror contained in it. Strength. He easily took out a few pieces of red hot coal from the oven in front of him. The pieces of coal with a temperature of at least hundreds of degrees were fed into his mouth piece by piece as if they had no temperature in his hand. The chewing sound of click, bang, bang echoed in the room, making Na Yuan tremble, and wanted to condolences to his gastrointestinal health. The most normal of these people should be the old man sitting on the sofa in the main seat, with white hair and beard, skin as withered as old tree bark, wearing a heavy fleece pajamas, and a tin smoking pot in his hand. After seeing Na Yuan come in, these people also spoke, but the atmosphere made Na Yuan extremely uncomfortable. Even if he knew that this was not a normal world, these people must be different from ordinary people. The graceful poisonous insect girl with the smell of herbs said, "I've been waiting for you for a long time, Na Yuan, right? I heard it just now. My babies seem to like you very much." Her so-called babies are naturally those deformed insects that make the scalp tingle under the blanket. As if to confirm her words, those strange poisonous insects whose appearance could not be seen deliberately made a hissing noise, accompanied by a faint earthy smell, as if welcoming Na Yuan's arrival. The brawny man who took the rolled red charcoal blocks as a stomach-strengthening and digestion tablet also spoke in a loud voice, saying, "I smell the corruption on your body, the same kind. You don't look delicious. There shouldn't be anyone coming back, I thought Na Yuan wouldn't come either." Xiao Qi sighed and continued, "You guys talk first, I'll close the door." After saying that, he turned around and walked out of the hut, probably to close the bookstore. Na Yuan calmed himself as much as possible, nodded slightly to these people, and walked towards the vacant sofa in the corner. Before he could think of what he should do next, there was a petite little loli in a gothic princess dress with 2 braids and a garish makeup. "You seem to be very indifferent to Na Yuan, why did it come at the last minute before closing time? What are you afraid of?" Na Yuan sat on the sofa stably and lay back lazily. There was a click from the door. It should be that Xiao Qi had closed the door of the bookstore. He really doesn't want to run away now, he doesn't have to think about it at all. These strange people who call themselves family members must be unable to beat them. If they detect something abnormal, the end may be worse than death. So Na Yuan could only let himself into the play, cooperate with their performance, and wait and see what happens. He looked indifferently at the little gothic loli, and said, "Dark night is my kind protective color, fear, I have forgotten what it is." He tried his best. His mind was running fast, and he could only spit out these 2 ambiguous words to cater to the strange atmosphere of these people. Fortunately, the effect was achieved, and these people actually understood what he meant. "It was probably safer to come late at night, so that I could hide my tracks, and the so-called fear is even more ridiculous. I already have nothing." Little gothic Lolita let out a chattering low laugh and said, "Darkness really suits you well. It seems that there is a problem with my sense of smell." "That's prudence, not fear." The poisonous woman also smiled and said, "The dark night reflects the rotten smell of your dead things. Na Yuan, my babies, and I, both want to taste the stories of you, come and sit next to me." Na Yuan's scalp felt numb when he saw those ghostly fuzzy poisonous insects. How could he go to sit on the same sofa with her? He raised his palm slightly, as if he had rejected the invitation of the poisonous beauty, and then seemed to be attracted by a few cigarettes on the table. He raised his hand and twisted one. After lighting it in front of the stove, Na Yuan held it lightly at the corner of his mouth. Seeing this, the poisonous beauty raised her brows and said, "It's really unreasonable, so outwardly." Cough. 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 As soon as she finished speaking, Na Yuan, who sat down calmly, coughed dryly because of the cigarette, which surprised everyone. It seems that people like them shouldn't be choking on a cigarette at all. This is also contrary to Na Yuan's appearance. But Na Yuan remained calm, stretched out 2 fingers, and used his fingers to forcibly squeeze the burning cigarette out. The high temperature burned his skin. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com gave off a slight burnt smell, and the pain was dull, allowing Na Yuan to be calm and let the crushed sparks dance on his fingers, leaving a few burning scars. Throwing the unsucked cigarette on the ground, Na Yuan said calmly, "It's a bit choking." In the last life, Na Yuan was not too addicted to smoking. He just saw a few loose cigarettes on the table. He was surprised that there are such things as cigarettes in this world. Of panic. But I didn't expect that this body is too weak, and it seems that there is no smoking experience, so the 2 coughs that were choked just now are indeed a real manifestation. However, Na Yuan reacted very quickly, and Ching Piao Piao crushed the cigarette butts in this tough guy way, which completely matched the creepy atmosphere here and made him look so gregarious. "Look, I crushed the cigarette butts with my fingers without even frowning. Now you know that I am also a ruthless person? This kind of pain is a drizzle to me, don't doubt me, we are the same kind, a happy family." After a brief period of surprise, everyone smiled knowingly, and no one doubted Na Yuan. The steel man who swallowed the carbon handed over a red hot coal, and said in a urn, "This is not choking." Na Yuan raised his eyes lightly to look at him, then stretched out and picked up a piece of red charcoal from his hand. The burning sound of ZZ made Na Yuan's skin twist. Although this body did not feel any pain, Na Yuan's previous knowledge still made Na Yuan's heart skip a beat, but he acted extremely light and calm. He sniffed the red charcoal between the tip of his nose and threw it into the stove. Said, "Thank you, my stomach has not been very good recently. You should keep this stuff and eat it yourself. Even if I don't feel pain, I might have a big problem after eating it." Seeing that Na Yuan was not interested in his snacks, the strong steel man didn't say any more, and started to crunch on his own. Xiao Qi, who went to lock the door of the store, also walked back at this time, looking at everyone cordially. There seemed to be a trace of loss, and said, "It seems that no one is coming again, those former partners should have been drowned in the long river of history. We are the last survivors." Bang bang bang. Sitting on the main seat, the old man in heavy fluffy pajamas tapped his cigarette bottle on the ashtray, shaking out the ash from the inner wall, which also attracted everyone's attention. He put the extinguished tobacco bottle next to him, his voice as deep as his face, and said, "My only remaining companions, from you, I realized the kindness that I have not seen for a long time. Although it is our first time to meet, it has been a long time. The next step will be for us to seek that deep hatred." There were 4 men and 3 women in the house, a total of 7 people. They were all solemn when they heard the words. The graceful poisonous woman also restrained her lazy temperament. "Wine," she said, "the history of the future will give justice to this hatred, and this history will be written by us." Little Gothic Lolita also let out a permeating laughter, with a creepy expression like she was watching a horror movie, and said, "I'm ready, let this hypocritical world let out a pleasant morning, I can't wait." The man who swallowed the carbon also put down the hot snacks in his hand, and said in a loud voice, "It's not delicious, it's not as delicious as those timid gods." Everyone said their own words, only Na Yuan was at a loss, but he had to pretend to be as solemn as the others. "What kind of is this? What is it that we met for the first time, but we haven't seen it for a long time, although I know that you people have problems with their brains, and they seem to be all villains, but they shouldn't be crazy like this. Why? Don't you think this is a logical fallacy? Also, this old man by your side, you seem to be the most honest, but he may look a little bit like a leviathan, but you also know that this hot charcoal is not delicious. If it is not delicious, you still pass it to me?" Everyone was actively speaking, and Na Yuan couldn't stay out of it. He racked his brains, exhausted his acting skills, and said in a low voice, "My rotten smell is very suitable for those things, they should be at the bottom of the filthy cesspool. To be with maggots in decay, not the bustling world. No matter how I heard it, I knew that this group of people was scolding another group of people. Naturally, Na Yuan didn't know who they were slandering, so he used those things instead. Anyway, just use their way of speaking to scold. It's always right to scold, right? Everyone agreed with Na Yuan's words very much. The gothic little loli with thick smoky makeup expressed deep empathy, and with a smile on her face, she immediately became cute and lovely, and said, "Na Yuan, you are really poetic, this is still my life. I have heard the 28th beautiful poem, as beautiful as the scratching from the cemetery. If I racked my brains to make it up, can I be ranked 28th? Can you, this little girl, praise people? Using the scratching sound in the cemetery as a metaphor, isn't it too dark a fairy tale?" 28. Na Yuan put on a poker face and looked over with deep eyes. Wu little gothic loli didn't know what the brain circuit was. Under Na Yuan's gaze, she glanced at him aggrievedly and said embarrassingly, "Well, I forgot that this is a poem you wrote, and it should have a family bonus. What do you think about the 23rd? If you're not satisfied, then the 19th." Na Yuan was really speechless. It was clearly a very dangerous situation. To reveal his secrets was to be smashed to ashes, but why did he always think that these dangerous people were crazy and cute? He couldn't help covering his forehead with his palm, and was speechless like a contemplative, not knowing how to answer. Seeing this, little gothic Lolita was extremely aggrieved and said, "Then 18 is it Na Yuan?" Xiao Qi, who was not far away, also spoke. She had a relatively normal appearance from beginning to end, but at this moment, she said, "Okay, Na Yuan, don't bully Nancy." Na Yuan raised his head, glanced at everyone, nodded silently, and did not say anything. It turns out that this little loli is called Nancy, but I? Bullying her? Come and tell me, how did I bully? Seeing Na Yuan nodding, Nancy also smiled happily, with a relieved expression, and said, "Then the 18th, it's a risk. The first chapters are very pleasant, I'm almost at a loss for choice." "Thank you Na Yuan, you are so generous. I like you more and more." Na Yuan only responded with a stiff smile when he heard the words, and then continued to observe silently. This group of people really went crazy and became an assembly line, and they could understand each other's logic. And their logic is incomprehensible to ordinary people, completely contrary to the established values of the world, and even the way they praise others, they are so maddening. Although there are only a few people he has seen in this world, Na Yuan has no doubts that this group of people is different from ordinary people even in the current weird world. Don't ask how Na Yuan knew that. When the landlord aunt scolded someone, she didn't describe it in such a frenzied way, but made her speechless with a series of witty words and clear logic. When Xiao Qi was picking up customers in front of the bookstore just now, she was also pretending to be normal. Can't she explain something? But it seems that as long as they are not considered aliens, they seem to be very kind, and they seem to be really treating each other as relatives, then continue to pretend until they find a safe way out. Next, Na Yuan never opened his mouth. He continued his role-playing and absorbed the logic of their speeches. From their conversation, Na Yuan also knew that the owner of the bookstore was the old man with a white beard, and the old man's name was Buck. In addition, words such as true gods, false gods, and beliefs also appeared, which seemed to indicate that these people were vaguely believers who were alienated from orthodox gods. While Na Yuan was thinking about it, the bookstore owner Buck spoke again and said, "You all came to this town under the guidance of your bloodline after the curse was over, and extracted the elements from the information that I had published wildly in the town. As long as it is our kind who comes to this town, they will definitely be attracted by the elements that only we can understand. Therefore, the other members are also almost declared dead, destroyed under that abominable curse. No matter how cautious they are, they will not come to meet us at this moment. As I said just now, there are only 7 of us now. We must watch and help each other in the years to come. Now, let's start the final step, completely liberate our power, clear the slavery of the curse, and verify our identity. The information revealed by these words also gave Nai Yuan a clue. This group of people was forced to separate the ends of the earth because of certain things, which they called curse and hatred. Then, under some guidance, they all gathered in this small town. This kind of guidance is understandable to Nai Yuan. After all, the motivation, or obsession, that let him come and dissipate after arriving, he has fully realized it. The old man Buck opened a bookstore in this small town to hide people's eyes and ears, and secretly released elements that only his own people could perceive. It should be released on a large scale, so that it is impossible for those of the same kind who come here to ignore it. So, is this why there were several newspapers and periodicals on the table in the room when I first arrived, and I extracted the core elements behind the job description of Buck's bookstore, that is, the reason for those 3 secret codes? I followed my intuition, met the code at the last moment, was accepted by this group of people as the same kind, and then got involved in an unclear whirlpool? This is secondly, the last step that Buck said, to lift the curse, release the power, and find out what happened to the body? I haven't confirmed my identity yet, I've already disguised myself to the extreme. If I test it in depth, won't it reveal my secrets? But up to now, he could only bite the bullet and move forward. Nai Yuan remained silent, watching the performances of these people, trying to find his own way out. When the rest of the people heard Buck's words, they all burst into laughter with joy and relief, but Nai Yuan couldn't stay out of it, showing a somewhat moved look. Buck continued, curse, like power, flows in our blood all the time. When the remnants of the old era gather together, it is an opportunity to break the curse and release power. I have prepared everything, you, too. Are you all ready? Bang! The steel man didn't say a word. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com raised a sharp knife on the table, slapped it with a big slap in a muffled voice, almost shattered the table, but found that the sharp knife did not pierce him. Palm! But fortunately, a strand of blood seeped out. Buck glanced at him angrily, and said, "My desk is expensive, and so is this knife." The Iron Man handed the bent knife to Buck, and the scarlet blood on it was crystal clear under the candlelight, and said, "I will pay you later." GGG. The poisonous insect girl stood up, but the poisonous insects in the blanket under her body disappeared somehow, and she did not know where it was hidden by her. She said, "That's what you said when you broke the bookshelf 2 days ago." As he spoke, he also stretched out his nails, which were obviously longer than ordinary people, and stroked them on his wrist. However, what made the scalp numb was that the wound opened by her sharp fingernails did not ooze blood, but the head of a bug, protruding from the cut flesh, as if looking at the outside world. The poisonous woman patted her wrist and said, "Go back, it's not time for you to appear." Nai Yuan was in fear of numbness in his scalp. He was thankful that he didn't seem to be the only one with no blood, but in the next moment, he was stunned. I saw that the worm shrank back when it heard the words of the poisonous worm girl, and then the scarlet liquid gushed out from the wound. The poison insect girl seemed to enjoy the pleasure brought by the flow of fresh blood. The morbid sticking out was also different from ordinary people. She licked her long and flexible tongue on her wrist and said, "It's delicious seeing this." Nai Yuan's heart was half cold, if he had. "Finish the calf. We are all descendants of the blood of God, and we will ignite the glory that has been silent for too long today, ha ha ha." The painting style became more and more crazy under the blessing of blood. These people were like taking stimulants, venting their long-held emotions in the flow of blood. Nai Yuan couldn't capture their excitement at all, and what was even worse was that he didn't even have blood, so he didn't know how to fit into this strange atmosphere. And his silence quickly attracted the attention of others. The 6 people, 3 men and 3 women, all sacrificed their own blood, but Nai Yuan was the only one who remained unmoved, which naturally aroused suspicion. "Nai Yuan, where is your divine blood? Let me smell it," Nancy said obediently. "I have no blood." Nai Yuan had to bite the bullet and tell the truth, there was no way to fool him. As soon as these words came out, everyone's eyes seemed to be three-pointed, and they all looked over strangely, as if they wanted to hear a perfect explanation. If Nai Yuan had the heart, under this kind of surveillance, he designated to stop for a beat. Even at this moment, he felt an invisible pressure, as if he was being stared at by a few hungry beasts, and he might be eaten at any time. "Clean." He forced himself to remain calm and said, "In order to come and meet you, I have already drained my blood, and I have more skin than a dry bone." Said, in order to increase the convincing power of his words, Nai Yuan tore off his inner lining, revealing the sparsely stitched chest cavity with a cold wound. "Although I don't know who stole my heart, but now I can only make a fuss about it. You see, I don't even have a heart, so I'm not a normal person at first sight. I'm similar to you, everyone is a group of people, don't doubt me." Anyway, the expression was extremely deep, but the inside was actually panicked. The atmosphere that had suddenly dropped 3 points of heat just now was accompanied by an invisible sense of oppression, which was really unbearable. Fortunately, when the terrifying wound on his chest was exposed, the sense of oppression was suddenly reduced, and everyone's eyes were attracted by the wound. The poisonous insect girl stepped forward and turned over her long, white palms, and she didn't know how she turned out a black bug about the size of a thumb that Nai Yuan had never seen before, and said, "Let me see your injury, I am pitiful." "Nai Yuan." The fingertips of the slender palm touched Nai Yuan's chest, and there was a faint cold touch, which also sent the bug to Nai Yuan's chest. The worm fluttered twice, slowly crawling to the wound, and then, under the gaze of his numb scalp, he opened the wound that was barely closed and burrowed in. Nai Yuan felt an itch in his chest, and a strong instinct made him want to open the wound and take the hateful bug out of his chest. But the fact is that he still pretended to be calm and said, the familiar sense of fulfillment, "But, it seems that it is not enough. Well, my chest has not been filled for a long time. It's really comfortable, but a bug was obviously too small to hold up my chest. If something like this goes against your heart, you need to say it in an unmoved tone." The poisonous worm girl tilted her head, with doubts in her surprise, and said, "It's really empty, there is nothing, the heart and blood are missing, only this withered body is left. You have suffered, Nai Yuan, next, let us take good care of you." Saying that, the poisonous girl was moved by herself, she suddenly stepped forward to hug Nai Yuan tightly, and everyone looked at her with sympathy. It was really like a stage play, and the invisible pressure was also swept away. Nai Yuan was hugged again. At first, he didn't know what was going on, but then they realized that they seemed to be convinced by what they said just now. "In order to come and meet you, I have already drained my blood." Could it be that these people have already made up for the hardships they have traveled all the way, and have empathy for it, so they show such expressions? What a bunch of weirdos with too much emotion! Nai Yuan gently pushed the poisonous insect girl away, looked at everyone, and said, "That's all fate, seeing you is my best consolation. Well, it doesn't matter, although I have really worked this journey, it was a near-death experience, and my eyes were full of despair. But fortunately, I am awesome. I have overcome 5 obstacles and left all difficulties and obstacles behind, and successfully came here to meet you. I'm already satisfied, you don't have to worry about me, it's all over." This remark made everyone send a strong kindness and emotion again, and Nancy was about to cry, saying, "Nai Yuan is even worse than us, I am so sad, I can't imagine what he met along the way, but he has already arrived home. After Nai Yuan, we will all live and die with you, no longer alone." Among them, a handsome man wearing a grey slim-fit trench coat, tall and slender, yet strong, handsome and elegant, could almost compete with Nai Yuan, and said, "From now on, we will share life and death." Nai Yuan looked at the people with deep eyes and said, I look forward to the poems about the future that I will write together with you." When the words fell, Nai Yuan suddenly felt the feedback of being bitten in his chest. Even though he didn't feel pain, he was probably able to perceive the state of his body. So the worm that burrowed into his chest cavity crawled out from the suture of flesh and blood, holding a mass of fresh meat, about half the size of a fingernail, in front of its limbs. The worm flapped its wings, leaped to the poisonous woman's shoulder, and handed the lump of meat to its master. The poisonous woman patted her special pet with her index finger, as if to compliment. After taking the lump of meat, the bug crawled behind her and disappeared. Looking at the mass of flesh at the fingertips that belonged to Nai Yuan, the poisonous woman said, "The blood of the gods has already penetrated into all parts of the body, even if the thoughts are no exception, the flesh should also contain the divine nature that belongs to you." Nai Yuan felt something wrong again, and he didn't know if there would be any problem with this piece of meat. But he could only take one step at a time, and said, "Then let's use it as a substitute." The old man Buck also nodded, looked at everyone and said, "Since everything is ready, let's ignite that divine spirit at this time and place. It's been a long time for you all, it's been a long time. Masters." When everyone else heard the words, their enthusiasm rekindled, and everyone seemed to be remembering something, as if preparing to welcome. "Long time no see, dear elder." Boom! A huge roar exploded in my mind, as if in a silent night, I suddenly saw a mushroom cloud rising not far away, accompanied by the roar of the dragon and the dazzling light. Nai Yuan only felt a flash in front of his eyes, and his brain suddenly stopped. When he came back to his senses, he found that everything around him was normal, and there was no change in the slightest. The shocking sound that directly touched the soul seemed to only appear in their consciousness, rather than directly acting on reality. Before Nai Yuan could return to his senses, he saw a ray of brilliance permeating from everyone's blood, including his own lump of flesh reacting the same way. Guangua is like a wicker-like hare, walking slowly in the air, turning left and right around, already knotted with each other, weaving the inside of the house gorgeously and magnificently. The brilliance of the Chu knot is woven continuously towards the center, like twisting the chaotic wool into a ball, becoming a light bulb-like existence, hanging in the air, illuminating the surroundings. It got smaller and smaller, until the bulb turned into a light spot smaller than a firefly, and suddenly it went out with a pop. Nai Yuan was already dumbfounded. Even if he knew about this strange world, it would definitely not be as normal as his own homeland, and there must be all kinds of magical things. He also had a certain amount of mental preparation, but when he saw a magical scene appear in front of him for the first time, and even barely counted himself as a part of it, when he triggered it, he was still shocked. Only this miraculous scene didn't last long at all. There was no extra movement at all, and it suddenly disappeared. At the moment when Nai Yuan had this thought in his heart, an inexplicable aura suddenly oozes out from the spot of light that went out just now. If ink drips into the vat, it will infect everything in an instant, and the surrounding painting style changes suddenly. The inexplicable atmosphere makes the rendering misty and infiltrating, and the flat white is plated with a layer of eerie colors. The surrounding scene clearly did not change. Yu reading www.yuganchu. The furniture and objects on the table have not changed at all except for being coated with a layer of abnormal aura. Even the stove is still burning, but it makes people feel as if they are in a different dimension. Nai Yuan didn't feel the heat coming from the stove anymore. In his heart, he wanted to walk to the stove and throw something into it to see if it could still be ignited. But seeing the expressions of these strange guys, I thought it was better not to act rashly. Buck opened his arms. His white beard could not cover his excitement. He opened his arms and said, "Please respond to the call of the descendants, cross the long river of time, come here since ancient times, and help us uncover the abomination, the curse of the gods, rekindle the power of the descendants of the blood of gods, great and noble, ancient gods." Others were also completely ignited by the scene, and they all issued their own calls to welcome their great ancestors here. Nai Yuan was supposed to be frightened by the scene in front of him, but getting along with this group of people before has given him a certain immunity. He bit his head and raised his hands slightly, like a veteran actor who had entered the play. His expression was a little bit of nostalgia, and he said in a daze, "We are here, imagine meeting the great you." As soon as his voice landed, clouds of black mist suddenly emerged from the void, and were discharged in front of everyone's eyes. If you count them, there were as many as 12. Each cloud of black mist is like a passage leading to an endless depth, suspended in the air, and inside it seems to be layered with layers of black clouds, rolling constantly like a stormy sea, filling the soul with a frightening breath. "You, finally, here." Nai Yuan was almost mechanized, and when he uttered such a sentence, he was completely numb. 12 groups of black mist hung side by side in front of everyone, and 7 of them were particularly violent. If the black fog is compared to the terrifying waves, then under these 7 terrifying waves, it seems that there is something terrifying at any time, and they want to break through the waves and devour everything. Fortunately, on the surface of this huge wave, there is a vague layer of film that tightly seals the terrifying things inside. When the things inside are about to emerge and come to the world, faint brilliance will emerge, and the brilliance will appear as a series of obscure inscriptions, like densely intertwined chains, steadily suppressing the things inside. Therefore, I can only see the giant creature under the film that makes the soul tremble. Under this layer of sealed film, vague shapes of some terrifying parts are vaguely revealed, but I can't see its true appearance. The 5 groups other than the 7 groups of black mist were much calmer. As the sealing membrane, they did not suffer a severe impact. They only let out a whimper, as if they were mourning something. At this moment, Nai Yuan seemed to understand something. Xiao Qi and the others have been saying sadly that only 7 of them survived. Then according to the current situation, is there a total of 12 companions? It was just because of the so-called curse that the other 5 died, and only 7 of them came together here after all the hardships. Are those sealed in these black mists the ancient gods, or elders, in their mouths? If the terrifying thing sealed inside is something called an ancient god, then everyone calls themselves the descendants of the blood of the gods, which seems to make sense. And how did these ancient gods, whose faint breaths frighten the soul, be sealed? It was too late to think more, because the 7 groups of black mist that reacted violently had already subsided, and they were suspended above everyone, corresponding to their descendants. The other 5 regiments stood aside and watched all this in silence. The wisps of breath visible to the naked eye emanated from the 7 black mists, which were deep green, deep black, and intermingled colors. Like tentacles, it lingered around the body of each descendant of divine blood, and gradually penetrated into everyone's body, and Nai Yuan was no exception. Then, there was a scene that Nai Yuan would never forget and his cognition collapsed. When the dry soil meets the rain, everyone looks at them with adoring and sincere eyes, allowing the breath to seep into their bodies. Their excitement is beyond words, and they make happy muttering sounds. This is not over yet. What really caught Nai Yuan's eyeballs was that the breath of the so-called ancient gods caused these people's physical appearances to undergo subversive changes, making Nai Yuan almost blurred out terrifyingly. The gentle and intellectual Xiao Qi seems to have bamboo shoots growing under her smooth, black waterfall-like hair. Her body bones also changed with a rattling sound, but it was just hidden under the skin, so it was difficult to know the real situation. However, the changes that occurred on the skin were visible to the naked eye. The skin became dark yellow and dull, and the flesh under the skin was twisted like a snake dance. In the next instant, what was about to emerge from the ground on her head was finally difficult to cover up by her long hair, and it grew savagely into 2 bison horns that curved into an exaggerated arc. Everyone except Nai Yuan has undergone reborn changes, as if one by one demons crawled out of the depths of purgatory, revealing a terrifying original shape in the world. Among them, the one who subverted Nai Yuan's cognition the most was the lively and lovely little Nancy Loli. I saw that her bones were also rattling, and then she leaned back, bent into a weird arc, and landed on all fours. Then her flesh and blood, her skin and her face were all infected by the breath of the ancient gods and began to mutate on the spot. In the blink of an eye, it transformed into a huge, grey-blue, terrifying monster that looked like an insect and an unknown reptile, like a dragon instead of a dragon. On the back and on the limbs, there are hard exoskeletons growing like tree branches, and 6 dark green eyes, from bottom to top, from large to small, slapped in 3 rows, and the tail also has exoskeleton tails, waving. The tiger is windy. Only the cute hairpin on the downside down hair can be used as a means of recognizing her, the rest, even the clothes have been corroded by the deep breath and completely lost their human form. The sight of this group of demons dancing wildly didn't make Na Yuan really tremble. After all, no matter how it changed, these creatures shouldn't hurt him for the time being. It's your own body, why hasn't the slightest change? In this scene, it seems that if you don't come to a big change, you can't fit in with the group. Fortunately, the mighty steel man not far away doesn't seem to have changed much. It's just that his muscles are more twisted and knotted, at least he can still see his original appearance. It proves that not everyone will have a complete change of life. Na Yuan comforted himself like this, and tried to calm down, wanting to feel the breath that entered his body, whether he was acting as a demon. In the end, he did absorb all of it, even a little more than others, but his body did not show any strange changes. It's like taking a hot bath, feeling refreshed and feeling very comfortable, like a spring breeze. Other than that, it's unremarkable. His unmoved attracted the attention of several other black mists. After everyone else's transformation had been completed, his thorn was still unable to escape and was noticed. This time, not only was the black fog in front of him emitting a deep breath, but the other black fog seemed to be saying, "Brother, can you do it? Let me help you." Then, a stronger aura spewed out from the other groups of black mist, all attacking Na Yuan. Na Yuan's body is open to anyone who comes, and I will as much as I come. It depends on whether your family is wealthy enough to manage it today, or whether I can swallow the abyss. The 6 companions who completed the transformation also looked curiously, their eyes were amazed, and they seemed to be weighing the reason for Na Yuan's situation. The more they looked, the more shocked they felt. Yes, now it is their turn to tremble with fear. No one knows the gold content of the ancient god's breath better than them. A single wisp is enough to make mortals turn into ferocious creatures. They can absorb so much because they are killing them. Break the curse on the body, and at the same time intensify the divinity potential of the descendants of the blood of God. Na Yuan, what's the situation? Is his potential so bottomless, or is the curse too heavy? Why is it not over yet? The people who were stunned did not react until the surrounding painting style was gradually fading, and the room was about to return to normal. At this time, Na Yuan didn't know how much he had absorbed. He was so refreshed that he exploded, but still nothing changed. It made him a little embarrassed. He wanted to say to these black mists, "Brother, if it doesn't matter, let's slow down and talk about it next time." But the shocking gazes of everyone and the black mist that did not believe in evil made him not know how to speak, so he could only maintain the status quo with a comfortable face. Until the bizarre painting style completely dissipated and everyone returned to the normal world from a different dimension, the 7 black mists were struggling to output, until they disappeared, and the channel for conveying breath was cut off. "Hey!" Na Yuan let out a long sigh. This was an instinctive reaction. It was really refreshing. It disappeared suddenly, making him still a little uncomfortable. The ceremony was completed, and everyone's goal was achieved. But there was no celebration and no passion, instead they stared at Na Yuan in a stalemate, staring at Na Yuan, making him feel extremely uncomfortable, as if he was the monster, not already more than the monster. Monster of them. Na Yuan thought that such a stalemate was not the way to go, so he opened his arms with a ceremonial expression, raised his head slightly and said, "We will finally be freed, thank you for your gift. Only then did the others express their own reflections. Thank you Mother God for the gift. We have broken the shackles under the glory of divinity, and we will surely live up to our expectations. Next, we will tear off the hypocritical mask of the world. The voices each had their own characteristics, hoarse and deep, obscure to the roar of a beast, but Nai Yuan could vaguely hear each person's original timbre. Moreover, he doesn't seem to be so timid anymore when he sees the mentality of these terrifying monsters now. He doesn't say he likes it, but somehow he thinks it's acceptable. Nai Yuan knew that this might be the change in his mentality brought about by that deep breath. But that's all. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but Nai Yuan didn't feel any changes in his body anyway. The monster after the transformation of the storekeeper Buck looked at Nai Yuan, who was all the same as before, and said, "How do you feel?" With these words of existence, Nai Yuan answered truthfully, "It feels really wonderful, more intoxicating than the whispers in the depths of the night." The steel man muttered angrily, "But you still look weak like a bug. Stupid heads always judge people by their appearance. The real power is often hidden under the harmless skin of humans and animals." A voice that Nai Yuan couldn't tell who it was, suddenly sounded in the room, and responded to the Iron Man with a mocking tone, but no one of the crowd said anything. This made Nai Yuan abruptly startled, but when he saw that no one responded, he calmed down and swept his eyes in the direction of the sound source. As soon as he looked up, he saw who the mouth was with a broken mouth, so he smiled bitterly to himself. "I saw that there was a small head growing next to the huge head of the steel man, but just because of the angle, I couldn't see it. Thankfully, I was still sighing just now, at least I can still see a little humanoid existence." As a result, Yu reading www.yuuganshu.com himself should not expect these people to have anything to do with normal. He actually had two heads, and it seemed that they couldn't see each other, so they laughed at each other. The steel man turned his head sideways to look at his little head and said, "Shut up, little one." The little head was not to be outdone at all, and said, "Stupid, stupid big." Big head said, "If there is a person who chops off my head, I will thank him, of course, not me." Little head said, "If you fall asleep, you will find yourself in the trash can with filth when you wake up. Of course, you may never wake up. As soon as you say a word, and I say a word, I almost start to pinch. It's a pity that whenever one head wanted to control the body to beat the other head gave an order to swing his fist towards his neighbor, and then the neighbor's neighbor let his fist down, and so on and so forth," watching Nai Yuan's brows jumping. "Okay, Gustav, go back to your room and make trouble again, so as to restrain your anger." The owner of Buck opened his mouth, and he could see that this body was the existence of an old man, and he had more right to speak than others. After he spoke, the two Gustavs stopped making trouble, but the little head still took advantage of his shortness to bite the big head's neck. The big head wanted to bite back, but found that his neck was too thick to bite at all. He was stuck in a dead end by that guy, and the angry big head Gustav was incompetent and furious. The rest of the people's eyes focused on Nai Yuan again, and the store owner Buck asked what everyone cared about, then Nai Yuan, "What are your abilities? Can you show us?" Eyes burning. Full of expectations. Seriously, if there was no one around, Nai Yuan really wanted to do some radio gymnastics on the spot to show off his punches. It's not that he misses the morning exercises on campus, but he wants to use this to verify whether he is Su Zhu, Duan Yu and the like who are possessing peerless martial arts without knowing it. According to his own perception, there is indeed no physical change. It seems that he is still in the ferocious circle. The only weak chicken can only continue to perform in order to maintain the appearance of life. In the eyes of others full of expectations, Nai Yuan, a genius in the sky, was able to absorb so much divine power, not to mention that he transformed into Ultraman on the spot. At least he should be a Kamen Rider human body, right? In their view, Nai Yuan's unremarkable might be the greatest terror. After bathing in a huge amount of divine power, you can still understate it, without frowning. Can you still explain the problem? Na Yuan can also clearly capture the strong expectations of these companions, but the reality is very skinny, and he feels that he can't bear to break their fantasy. Under the calm appearance, countless thoughts flashed in Na Yuan's mind. He was trying his best to organize the language, trying to continue to fool the past. In the end, he puffed out his chest and choked out this sentence: "When my heart beats again, there will be a burst of power that will make the world tremble." The meaning at the moment is, don't ask, ask is that I am still a weak chicken, weak enough to have the strength to bind a chicken. However, he did not completely cut off the hope of his companions. He fabricated a lie that seemed to never be realized. Let's wait until my heart is revived again. A hollow heart strongly limits my performance. If my heart can't beat, my strength will never be displayed. As for how to make my heart beat again, I can't think of a way anyway. If you can do it, then you are considered good, okay? So. The monster that Nancy transformed into hesitated. Na Yuan, are you still an ordinary person? Na Yuan nodded and said, that's it for now. Look, I'm right. Gustav the big head said angrily to Gustav the little head, he is really weak like a bug. The monster turned into a poisonous worm. Girl laughed and said, Mr. Gustav, I need to correct a mistake that I wanted to correct for a long time. Worm, it is not weak. The voice of the monster Nancy, in the ears of ordinary people, must be of the level of a wild beast, but the content of the words still revealed a deep innocence. Her 6 green eyes all looked at Na Yuan. Said, then before you are really strong, we will protect you, you have to become powerful quickly. Up to now, there is no reason to doubt Na Yuan anymore, and everyone trusts his words. After all, they had matched the code again, and they had been verified by the bloodline. They could no longer think of any reason why Na Yuan was a fake. It's just that Na Yuan's situation did not meet their expectations. The monster transformed by the shopkeeper Buck said, is that so? Then I will try to forge a strong enough heart for you. During the conversation, the monster gradually condensed, and the hideous body parts began to converge. Soon, the terrifying appearance faded away, and it returned to the appearance of the white-bearded old man Buck. And a mass of black chi appeared on his body. When the black chi dissipated, a simple and unknown material appeared on Buck's body. Na Yuan couldn't help muttering, so you can really forge a heart for me? How to make it? Na Yuan didn't want to ask too much, including the clothes made of black chi, which looked like paper, and how he did it. In short, the scene I saw tonight was enough to subvert the perception. Na Yuan felt that a few more pieces would be acceptable. He nodded to Buck and said, thank you. Why do you want to thank? Buck looked at him and said, it should be done. Na Yuan smiled and did not speak. He had already adapted to the strange attitude of these people. Beginning with Buck, everyone else also began to take off their terrifying appearances, return to their original appearances, and materialize their clothes. Nancy was wearing a black dress. When she turned into a human figure, she started to rub her eyes, yawned, and said, I'm so sleepy. The store owner Buck looked around at everyone and said, the shackles from the false god's curse have been broken, and our strength will gradually recover. There is no bottleneck to speak of. It still takes a little time to digest the breath from the Father God and sleep. Get up and embrace a new future. Hearing this, Nancy walked out of the living room without looking back, yawning, and as she approached the corridor, as if she had remembered something, she turned her head and said, Na Yuan, see you tomorrow. If you are in danger, call out. Na Yuan smiled and said, see you tomorrow, Nancy. It seemed that Buck had already prepared rooms for everyone before he came. Gustav said before leaving, do you want to sleep with me? I will protect you, although I am ugly and stinky, I will snoring and sleepwalking. No, it is not what I said later, I am not stinky, it is him, damn bad guy. There was a personality split on the spot, and Na Yuan was in a cold sweat. But I also know that it should be Mr. Gustav Jr., who is doing something in secret, so after the power is released, Mr. Gustav Jr. will always exist in the body of this fierce man. Nai Yuan smiled and said, "No need, Mr. Gustav." Gustav nodded and said, "All right, I'm afraid the fight will hurt you." Bang bang. After saying that, he slammed his head with 2 punches, and walked out cursing while hitting. Nai Yuan looked stupid anyway. The shopkeeper Buck on the side said, "There are a total of 12 rooms in the corridor, which are reserved for everyone. There are 5 empty rooms now. You can choose any one, or you can sleep with other people." Somehow, at this point, Nai Yuan was not sleepy at all. I don't know if it was the huge amount of divine aura that made him refreshed, or because he slept for too long during the day. Now that he knows that he is fooling the past, there is no identity crisis for the time being, and his emotions that he originally wanted to run away have eased a lot. Nai Yuan is more interested in the structure of the world than sleeping. It just so happens that this is not a bookstore. Nai Yuan thought about it for a while, and said to the shopkeeper Buck, "Bathing in the glory of my father's generation again reminds me of a lot of things, and my sadness overwhelms my tiredness. Let me keep watch for you in the sea of books." Although the owner of Buck was surprised when he heard the words, he recalled that Nai Yuan said before that the dark night is his kind and protective color. Perhaps his attributes are suitable for thinking and acting in the dark night. There was no doubt that he was there, and he went straight to the large chair he was sitting on before, and then moved a deer antler that seemed to be used for decoration above the large chair. Only the sound of Jikuo's movement could be heard faintly, and then the wall actually rotated 90 degrees, revealing the dark space hidden behind. The store owner Buck probed for the wall inside, and then lit 2 gas lamps, which instantly revealed the original appearance of the inside. This is a somewhat cramped space. There are 2 bookshelves on the left and right sides against the wall. The bookshelves are not neatly stacked with books. These books are mostly outdated, and many of the book covers have mottled traces of time. The owner of Buck said, "This is my collection of books. Since you want to read it, the contents in it should be more interesting to you than the ones that are sold publicly." Naturally, Nai Yuan was attracted by the library in the secret door. Since it was Buck's library, there must be a lot of bizarre contents recorded in it. Perhaps it would be of great help to him to understand the world. He stepped forward, looked at the scene in the library, and said, "Let me see how many secrets you have kept." Buck nodded, pointed to the gas lamp on the inner wall, and said, "This is also a switch, just turn it." As he said that, he also stepped forward to demonstrate and turned on the gas lamp. The sound of the machine came again, and the wall slowly closed. Before closing, Buck stepped back and walked out, and said to Nai Yuan who was inside, "If you are tired, just find a room to rest. Of course, you can sleep here, then, see Nai Yuan tomorrow morning." Nai Yuan nodded and said, "See you tomorrow morning, Buck." Click. When the words fell, the door of the dark room was just closed, and there was no gap in the stitching. The shadows above the dark room cast strands of cool air, and when Nai Yuan looked up, he saw a few gaps in the ceiling, and he knew that there was no problem with ventilation. Looking at the neatly arranged books, Nai Yuan tried his best to calm down. Let's be safe when it comes. Although these guys are by no means good, and they can scare a person to death just by their looks, but they have no relatives and no reason in this world, and they don't have a clear understanding. Maybe they will encounter some dangers after running away. I'll just eat and live with them for the time being. Let's look at the situation later. It's just a coincidence that I found a few bodyguards. Anyway, they all completely accepted their identities, and it didn't look like they couldn't get along. Nai Yuan began to search for his goal among the hundreds of thick books on the 2 rows of bookshelves. He found that these books should be classified, not randomly placed, but there is no nameplate marked. Nai Yuan really can't see the types of most books. For example, the bookshelves in front of me are filled with books with titles such as Feng, Sun and Moon and Crazy Fury. Just by the title of the book, it is impossible to know what is recorded in it. Na Yuan curiously took out the book Feng, Sun and Moon from the bookshelf, and casually opened it from the center, wanting to see the contents inside. But when he only opened a little gap, he froze in place, and saw that from the gap he opened, it actually seeped out. Sun-like temperature. Blah blah blah. Na Yuan closed the book. He didn't even open it completely and put it back. Then, as if he wanted to prove something, he took out the Book of Crazy Rage. This time, he was especially careful, his head was far away, and Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com tried to open the first page of the book. Still only a gap is exposed, and then nothing happened. Just when Na Yuan wanted to open it completely and look at the contents, suddenly, a ray of irritability flashed through his mind. Na Yuan restrained his emotions of wanting to open the book completely. Looking at the dark seam of the book that he opened, the irritability in his mind intensified, and even turned into a kind of anger, which made his breathing heavier. Blah blah blah. Before this anger could get out of control, Na Yuan forcibly controlled himself to close the book and put it back intact. Wind, sun, moon, anger, lust, madness. As the name suggests, what is recorded or stored in the book is gust of wind, sunlight, moonlight, anger, desire and madness. Well, it really is crazy enough, such a world, such a group of people. For this world, Na Yuan once again had a further understanding from the two books that he hadn't really read yet. After the unreasonable irritability in his mind eased, Na Yuan also knew that he should stay away from these books whose titles he could not understand. He pulled out a book called A Brief History of Ancient Gods from the bookshelf in another column. He still opened it carefully. There was no problem this time. The contents above were completely presented in front of Na Yuan's eyes, and they were all words that he could understand. After that, Na Yuan put down his guard a little and took out the books next to the book, such as A Brief History of the Outer Gods, A Brief History of the 14 Churches, and The Real Map, to be filled, and piled them in the dark room. On the small desk, he immersed himself in the pages. This time, it was the whole night, watching Na Yuan's brilliance again and again. In the ancient era before this era, there were 12 supreme gods. They were the creators of the world and the ancient masters of all things. Everything in the world was given to mortals by them. All intelligent beings are, it is belief in their existence, bathed in great glory. But one day, 14 aliens appeared among the mortals. Not only did they not appreciate the gift of the Great Master, but they also deceived the love of the Great Master, but in the end they failed this love and stole their power. And drove the creators of the world out of their paradise. Then, with the power he stole, he occupied the altar of the great rulers, claiming to be the main of the 14 pillars, and enjoying the beliefs of mortals with a grandeur. Today's mortals have forgotten that period of ancient history, or in other words, the real past was sealed up by 14 thieves, so they mistakenly thought that they were under the glory of the thieves. Under the control of the thieves, 14 evil organizations came into being as their minions, spreading the stalwart of the thieves everywhere, generation after generation, forming the 14 churches that are now aloof, as accomplices but enjoying the ignorance of mortals' sincere worship. But the truth will one day break the falsehood, uncover the hypocrisy of the thieves, and present the truth from ancient times to the eyes of the world. This is a fragment of records from A Brief History of the Ancient Gods and A Brief History of the 14 Churches. After reading through several books that expand the world view, Na Yuan also has a certain understanding of this treacherous world. The great master who appeared in the ancient book should be the existence called Ancient God by Buck and others. They are the original supreme gods of the world, and the 14 thieves are the main gods worshipped by the 14 churches today. In this way, the so-called ancient gods and the main gods really exist in this world. After all, it was only yesterday that I felt the so-called divine breath from the 12 black mists. This is an insurmountable bend, and there is no need to doubt its authenticity. However, apart from the ancient gods and the main gods, the contents recorded in a brief history of the outer gods also interested Nai Yuan. There are such a group of mysterious sects in the world that believe in the ethereal, the so-called outer gods. Among them, there are righteous people and evil spirits. The internal belief policies are also very divided, and the factions are complicated, so it is difficult to maintain their existence. Some of the splintered factions have the same doctrines as those of individual Lord God churches, some advocate justice, and some advocate nature. There are also some factions whose teachings are incompatible with the world, and even evil and filthy. To put it simply, they are anti-human. Therefore, the former type of faction that advocates justice and nature has made many kingdoms acquiesce in its existence. After all, there are many devout people who believe in the Lord God, and many nobles have joined it. As for the latter, everywhere there are rats crossing the street, they are regarded as evil sects, and everyone shouts and beats them, and they can only hide in the shadow of the world and survive. After reading this book, what surprised Nai Yuan most was that the main gods actually accepted the existence of the so-called outer gods and allowed the major factions of the mysterious church to spread branches and leaves in the world. Although the Lord God has never said anything about recognizing the mysterious church has always had ground for sprouting, and it has not received a severe blow from the Lord God Church. Doesn't it also explain the problem? According to the description, many members of the mysterious church also devoutly believe in certain, or even certain, main gods. In the eyes of those gods, there seems to be no belief that cats and dogs must choose one or the other. You can like cats, you can like dogs, you can like both, or even, neither. Being able to make believers so free to make their own choices without letting down the wrath of thunder is like. The 14 main gods are not as evil as described in the book. At least from this point of view, people respect the self-choice of mortals. It's over. Did I have a gap in thinking with Buck and the others? I must not let them know about such doubts, or they will not be able to clear it if they jump into the endless sea. What interests Nai Yuan most is that the book says that the outer gods come from outside the chaos, and they occasionally respond to the call of the believers and drop obscure and vague words that are terrifying, majestic and unreal. And those few words are all obscure languages that are completely different from this world. They are called God's whispers by the mysterious church. Some of them have devoted their lives to deciphering those obscure language fragments. But Nahi is too fragmented, and on the way to his arrival, he has lost too much timber. Every whisper of the gods is difficult to form a complete sentence, and it is difficult to even capture a clear vocabulary, and the styles are very different. So far I have not found much clues. Anyway, in these records, the outer gods never really came. Perhaps it is precisely because it does not compete with the main gods that the existence of the mysterious church is tolerated. After all, the book also said that the outer gods may be righteous or evil, and mortals have not been able to define them, understand them, and imagine them. The success rate of the summoning ceremony is basically zero. Among the anecdotes that are not known to be true or false, there are few successful occasions, and there is no time to leave a few words, and they are excluded from the world, leaving only a dull carrier. The rhetoric of the Church is that the Lord God has blessed the world so that all living beings can live happily in this infinite pure land. Those things that come from outside the chaos, it is difficult to distinguish their good and evil, they are all isolated by the glory of the main gods. However, the main gods retain the believer's desire for the unknown, and respect each creature's desire to find out with great love. In other words, there are many evil demons outside the chaos. It is impossible to tell the good from the bad. The Lord gods protect the whole world with their mighty power. Their glory keeps all the heretics away and cannot invade. This kind of protection of all beings is equal, not only for the group of believers, but also for the infinite world, including giant city-states, endless seas, nether worlds. All living beings and soils are also included. After all, God loves the world. Outside the dark room, there was a sound of squeaking, and it should have dawned, and someone had woken up. Na Yuan looked at the book on the table and fell into deep thought. Outer gods are alienated from this world, and it is difficult for mortals to measure their existence. The summoning ceremony, which has a 0 success rate so far, requires a carrier to undertake the thoughts of the outer god. There are obscure languages, very different from any known language system, Chinese, English, Count. Na Yuan was surprised to find that he actually fit all the descriptions of outer gods. Not the natives of this world. Now this heartless body carries consciousness. I also understand Chinese and English that you absolutely cannot understand, and even a few sentences in Japanese, Korean, Russian. No way. No way? The noise outside the house was clearer, and I could even hear the sound of a wagon wheel running over the bluestone road outside the bookstore. Na Yuan suppressed the crazy thoughts in his heart, took a long breath, got up and picked up a few books on the table, and then put them back to their original positions according to his memory. Just when he put the last real layout, to be filled back into the bookshelf, he found that in the bottom corner of the bookshelf, there were scattered 2 leather books that looked older than him. Unlike other books, there are only 2 books in the bottom row of bookshelves, as if some of them are not welcomed by Buck, they are just stuffed there. Na Yuan squatted down curiously, took out one of the books, and saw Lost Alchemy written on the leather bookcase. Rather than writing, it is better to say that the leather case was chiseled, and then the depressions carved by the chisel were filled with grey paint. Not only is the book cover made of leather, but the paper inside feels the same. With the experience of reading Crazy Furious, Na Yuan only opened a little gap from a distance this time. When he found that there was no problem, he came closer to watch. It doesn't matter at this point, my dear, Na Yuan found the content above and knew every word, but when he connected it, he couldn't understand a single word. No, I can't say that completely, at least the title is understandable. For example, on the first line of the first page, it is written in significantly larger and bolder fonts than other words. Recipe for human body power generation. Then the following text, Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com, is blinding, and it says so-called ingredients: egg fried blade, sangzao fart, sweet. Transliteration of different world text. What's the matter? Is it because I have a low level of physical education and little knowledge, or is the author just writing it at random? Let's not talk about the alchemy of another world. Is it really magical? Even if there is indeed a power that can turn corruption into magic, you should make up something normal. You can't find it when you look at it on a page. What about something I know? Or are these things lost in ancient times, so they are not known to the world? But with such a name, I really can't figure out what the object is. It's extremely weird. Na Yuan recited the words above, and felt that it was really bizarre. The whole article was written inexplicably. Now he somewhat understood the powerlessness of those mysterious believers who wanted to decipher the language of the outer gods. He squatted down again, and was about to put this lost alchemy back. However, at the moment when he was about to touch the bookshelf, Na Yuan, through the absurd empathy he had just had with the believers of the mysterious church, suddenly found kind of like a light. He suddenly turned to the first page again, and began to repeat the names of the first 3 ingredients of the recipe on the first page in the language of his previous life. Egg fried blade, sangzao fart, sweet. Egg fried blade, sangzao fart, sweet. Rice grass blade, jujube peel, sweet. Scarecrow, banana peel, Scott. Scarecrow, banana peel, thinking special. Scarecrow, banana peel, sweat. Frightened. No way. No way. If the words on this book are regarded as transliteration, and they are read out in the way of homophony of the earth language, they can find the corresponding words with real meaning. Na Yuan was shocked by his discovery. He continued to read in disbelief, and found that those obscure words that he couldn't understand could basically be interpreted in the language of the earth. Among them, there are the most words translated from Chinese and English, and there are only a few words, which are obscure pronunciations that Na Yuan can't decipher. He thought that it might be other Earth language systems that he hadn't come into contact with, or that he couldn't find the trick. After all, even the most familiar Chinese, some transliterated words from other worlds, would take a while to respond. Then, how much gold is there in the content recorded in the book The Lost Alchemy? Is it possible to formulate reagents that allow the human body to master lightning, flame, and flying ability by deciphering the above materials? In this book alone, there are nearly 100 strange recipes recorded, and the title of each recipe is extremely eye-catching. The Human Body Power Generation Formula, Human Body Flame Control Formula, Floating Ability Formula, etc., are all pediatrics. There are even Material Constriction and Expansion Formula, Human Body Energizing Formula, Ignite Divinity Formula, etc. These titles make people think of it when they see it. And Na Yuan also knew that he might be the only person in the world who can crack these recipes. Because the word lost in The Lost Alchemy has already explained the problem, which proves that the author believes that it has been lost. No one can decipher the raw materials recorded in the recipe anymore. Moreover, from the performance of his body and the communication with Buck and others, it has been seen that it is impossible for people in other worlds to speak Chinese and English. Even if the consciousness of this body dissipates, the instinct is still there. Na Yuan can easily read newspapers in other worlds, which means that the body's basic cognition of the world is still there. Know its meaning. Although Buck and the others are out-and-out monsters, their accumulation of knowledge must be far above the average level of another world. They know a lot of secrets, and even Buck owns a bookstore. He must have read these rare books before putting them in. If even they can't read the book The Alchemy of the Lost, it proves that people in other worlds are basically blind. If it wasn't for the fact that I had taken the CET4 test and prepared for the CET6 test, I wouldn't have been able to crack this book so much. Even though the 6th level was swiped, the accumulated vocabulary still remains in my mind. The above formula is just the homophony of some words, and he doesn't need to test his grammar or oral English. Na Yuan knew that if he thought about it for a while, most of the common words could be deciphered. As for the authenticity of the formula recorded above, Na Yuan didn't question it too much. He didn't think it was a fraud, right? Now, he has a considerable understanding of the strangeness of the different world. The changes that happened to Buck and the others are still vivid in his eyes. The dark shadow of the so-called ancient descended directly into his body. In Buck's library, there shouldn't be any extras. The 2 books Feng, Sun and Moon and Crazy Rage, which he dared not open, fully reflect the magic of these collections. That means that the books put in by Buck were all authenticated by him, and should not be parallel imports. Bang bang, there were 2 dull knocks on the door of the dark room. Before Na Yuan could respond, Buck's voice passed through the dark door and clearly reached Na Yuan's ears. "May I come inside?" "Cough, come in, this is your library." Na Yuan restrained his emotions and said in the direction of the secret door. "Ka ka ka," Ji Kuo's voice came again. The secret door slowly opened, and the faint rays of light came in after the dawn outside, making the dark room much brighter. Buck's figure appeared at the door, and behind him, Nancy was passing by in her pajamas with a toothbrush in her mouth. When looking through Buck's body and seeing Na Yuan holding a book in the dark room, Nancy smiled and waved her hand, mourning Na Yuan while speaking. A few bubbles of toothpaste were sprayed out, which looked extremely cute. Na Yuan also responded with a smile, "Morning, Nancy." While brushing her teeth, Nancy walked towards the corridor and said, "I'll play with you when I finish brushing my teeth." Sister Chiao Chi made me have to brush for 5 minutes. What a vicious and bad mother-in-law, hum. Having said that, the toothbrush in his mouth never stopped. His mouth was very arrogant, but his body was very honest. He promised to brush for 5 minutes, and he had to brush for 5 minutes. Na Yuan couldn't help laughing, then looked at Buck and said, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" Buck shook his head and said, "Just to let you know that dinner is about to start." Georgie should be ready in 10 minutes. Pack up and go to the dining room for breakfast. Na Yuan nodded and said, okay, I'll pack up and go. After all, he has also stepped on people's footprints. No matter what, he has to clean up and put the book back in its original place. Buck's eyes swept around the bookshelf and said, is there any gain after watching it for one night? Na Yuan thought for a while and said, it reminded me of a lot of things. Some knowledge is like a spring, awakening my long-lost memories. Buck touched the row of books that contained a brief history of the ancient gods on the bookshelf and said, such a forbidden book has long been banned from being circulated, and has been buried in the long river of history. It can only be seen here. I spent a lot of time. It took a lot of effort to keep these ancient books. After speaking, his eyes fell on the lost alchemy in Na Yuan's hands again, and he said with some surprise, I didn't expect you to be interested in this book. It records many powerful and unpredictable alchemy formulas, but it has been completely lost, and no one can decipher it. Now that it's all said and done, Na Yuan asked along the way, do you think the formula effects presented in the title are all real? Buck thought for a while, and said, I can't be completely sure, but it must have some strange effects, because these two lost books are themselves a powerful alchemy product. After thousands of years of wind and rain, they are still intact. Lossless, content is clearly visible. I once tried burning it with flames, and it didn't hurt it in the slightest, at least to ensure the singularity of its material, and using such a rare technology to preserve and enchant it, it should not be a fake that only records some nonsense, then pointless. So, I will keep it here. Hearing this, Na Yuan's heart moved, and he asked again, so, where do you think the above formulas come from? Buck replied, no one should know the specific source of the formula, but it is said that in the ancient times, longer than the ancient times, there was a more powerful alchemy than today, and it often showed the power of turning decay into magic. Some people also said that in those days, they could still capture clear words from the outer gods from the void, and there were even anecdotes about the outer gods coming down for a short but real time. Putting the two clues together, I guess that the original human beings learned these magical alchemy from the whispers of the outer gods, and then preserved them in a special way. This is the book in your hand. Book? Is that so? Na Yuan muttered, but his mind was full of thoughts and doubts. Did you learn it from the whispers of the outer gods? Does the outer god speak Chinese and English? If this is the case, then am I not the outer god who really came? But I know the world I once lived in, so there must be no such bizarre alchemy, at least I have never heard of it. Because the formula recorded in this book completely violates the physical rules of his own world. You said that gasoline and mechanical products can generate electricity, I understand and understand. You said that high-frequency particles combined with a collider can burst out powerful energy. I don't understand it, but I can barely understand it. But if you say that scarecrows, banana peels and sweat can make the human body generate electricity, that would be too much. If you bully me for not studying enough, you can't completely treat me as a fool. However, in such a world, perhaps because of the very different rules of the world, can the alchemy or witchcraft that was abandoned in the previous life really be carried forward? It's just Buck's guess, there must be something wrong, and he can detect the loopholes in it. Because even a on earth who sleeps in his sleep and utters some incomprehensible nonsense, he shouldn't have uttered an alchemy formula that is illogical but has real meaning. So there must be truths that I can't speculate for the time being, and maybe even the people who wrote this book know little about it. He may just know some simple whispers of the outer gods, that is, those slightly basic words, and then after seeing the extraordinary alchemy, Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com is shocked, so he uses the talents of the outer gods. Word, recorded it. It's just the language handed down from the outer gods of the void. For some unknown reason, it has been completely lost in the current era. Also, how can it be a mixed language? For a while it was a Chinese homonym, a while it was an English homonym, and a small language homonym that I couldn't understand. Fortunately, most of them are bilingual in both Chinese and English. Otherwise, if the whole article is mixed with various languages, then I will only be blinded. Buck looked at Nai Yuan's thoughtful expression, and said again, if you are interested in the whispers of foreign gods, I can get a few ancient translations, which are about the deciphering of the syllables of foreign gods, but I don't know if the content above is true or not, because there are always some people want to swindle and deceive in the name of an outer god, and there are many high-ranking people. So up to now, many books about the whispers of the outer gods are difficult to distinguish between true and false. But if you want to decipher this lost book of alchemy, it is completely impossible. Anyone who knows a little bit about the outer gods can be the guests of the mysterious church and other high-ranking people. No one in the world can decipher them. Even half a page of recipes. The meaning of the loss is here. If there is only a lack of a few formula materials, and the current alchemy is used to reverse it, there is a high probability that the complete formula can still be traced back, but it is full of unknown shortcomings. Nai Yuan's eyes lit up when he heard the words, and said, can we trace out the whole formula with only a few ingredients? Buck gave him a strange look and said, yes. Blah blah blah. Nai Yuan closed the letter in his hand and said firmly, Buck, I want to learn alchemy. As long as you can decipher most of the ingredients, you can reverse the formula. Isn't that meat delivered to your door? I was still hesitant. There are many formulas, there are small language words that I can't decipher. So we can only look for those formulas that are only composed of Chinese and English syllables, so as to try to restore some lost alchemy. In Buck's eyes, the alchemy recorded in this book is mysterious and unpredictable, which proves that as long as a formula is restored, the strange and powerful power written in the title should be able to be reproduced. Nai Yuan has full confidence in Buck's knowledge, even if they only knew each other for less than a day. He is the only one who can decipher the language of the outer gods. Who makes himself possible to be the so-called outer god. But unfortunately, in most of the recipes, there are transliterations in other languages that you don't know. But now Buck tells himself that it doesn't matter if he lacks 2 or 3 kinds of raw materials. The alchemists of this era can also be deduced in reverse. Then what is there to hesitate? The Chinese and English that I know can decipher more than 80% of the ingredients. Must learn alchemy. This may be the biggest capital for him to settle down in another world in the future. Although Master is a weak chicken, he is an outer god. Who can understand the language of the outer god better than the outer god? Buck looked at Nai Yuan, who was confident in his words, and said in surprise, I understand alchemy, and I can teach you completely, but judging from your appearance, are you planning to reproduce these recipes? Nai Yuan thought for a while and said, aren't you curious about what my awakening ability is? So the wisdom from ancient times is also one of my abilities. During these years of living abroad, I have also accumulated a lot of experience and knowledge. I have an unusual perception about the whispers of the outer gods. Buck was silent for a while after hearing the words, then stepped forward, opened the first page of the book in Nai Yuan's hand, pointed to the bottom of the human body power generation formula, and said, read out the names of the first 3 ingredients. Nai Yuan did not grumble, and directly repeated, scarecrow, banana peel, sweat. It can be said that the words are eloquent, and it is completely revealed in the language class when the teacher teaches the tone of the words. Buck's cloudy eyes lit up when Nai Yuan read the first sentence scarecrow, and the wrinkles hidden under the pale beard were blooming like flower bones, full of surprise. Seeing this, Nai Yuan lightly closed the book and asked, what do you think? Buck nodded and said, very good, I have also studied the whispers of the outer gods. It was a long time ago, but like everyone else, it was equivalent to nothing, but it was that experience that made me realize that, your pronunciation is definitely more neutral than any expert in this field, and it is very consistent with the smoothness of a complete language system. It seems that what you said is indeed correct. You have an abnormal understanding of the whispers of the outer gods that no one else can imagine. Is it the awakening of ancient wisdom, and your experience over the years, has played a catalytic role? Na Yuan replied, it can be said that after I woke up last night, many things that I couldn't understand before suddenly became clear. Buck whispered, no wonder you came to read the book alone after that, to prove your awakened wisdom, right? Forward. Well, since you've figured it out. Na Yuan replied calmly, that's right. Buck nodded and said, if you want to learn alchemy, I can teach you at any time. You can take these 2 books, or put them here, and I will keep them for you. Your ability to awaken is not weaker than any of us, even, much stronger. I am happy for you, Na Yuan, and also for our future. But Georgie should already have dinner, so pack up and come to the dining room. After speaking, he patted Na Yuan on the shoulder, turned and walked towards the dark room. Okay, let's eat first. Na Yuan replied with a sound, looked at the book in his hand again, and decided to put it back, and then take it out and read it when needed, or he could make a copy of the deciphered formula on paper. But now, I know my own situation. If I leave this bookstore, I am afraid that any passerby will be able to hang and beat me. Instead, Buck and the others are there to protect him. When the time comes, someone will prepare breakfast for him, so why not do it? Books are kept in the dark room, and they are guarded by everyone. It is definitely safer than putting them on their own. Na Yuan put the book back to its original position, and let the 2 lost alchemy continue to be placed on the bottom shelf without any sense of existence. Then he got up and went to clean up the library, cleaned it up, and prepared to go to the dining room for breakfast. When he was leaving, he looked down and found a few wisps of cotton-like dust that floated into the collar that had been loosened due to his pulling last night, and stuck to his open chest. Na Yuan put his palm into the collar, wiped off the filth on it, and decided to ask Buck later if they had any needles and thread, sew the chest tightly, and don't let the filth get in. There are insects crawling inside, and dust falling into it. Although his chest cavity does not have a heart, it is not a garbage dump. I don't know which postmodern artist sewed it on himself. Not only is it not aesthetically pleasing, it is extremely perfunctory, and it is not sealed at all. It belongs to no professional ethics. The door of the dark room was closed, and it returned to the appearance of the wall, which was tightly stitched. Na Yuan also entered the corridor and walked towards the dining room where the voice came from. In the dining room, people have gathered, Buck is sitting in the main seat, Xiao Qi is bringing dinner plates to everyone, and the others are also helping. Nancy had already tied a napkin on her chest, holding a tableware in each of her left and right hands, ready to start a meal, and repeated excitedly, eat, eat, eat. As he spoke, he shook his body according to the rhythm, as if he couldn't wait. Mr. Gustav is also busy cursing himself there, occasionally shaking his body uncontrollably, causing the table to shake. Everything looks so happy. What a warm and relaxed family. Hearing Na Yuan's footsteps, everyone looked over. Nancy waved the tableware in her hand and said, sit here Na Yuan, sit next to me. Hurry up, we're waiting for your meal. When she was talking, Xiao Qi also happened to place his plate on the table next to Nancy. The breakfast that Xiao Qi prepared was sandwiches, hot porridge, and milk tea. Everyone had one, and the amount was the same, including Nancy's small body, which was no less than others. After all, Na Yuan met yesterday, her true appearance is not small at all. Na Yuan greeted with a smile and said, morning, everyone. The others also responded with a smile and let him take his place. Just as he sat down, the handsome man next to him who was reading the newspaper handed him a sheet and said, morning paper. Na Yuan took it and said, thank you, Aztec. The handsome man's name was Aztec, he didn't talk much, and he didn't have much presence last night. But this handsome face, which surpassed all the stars in Na Yuan's memory, still made Na Yuan's memory fresh. After all, the feeling of mutual sympathy that is also a prosperous face is difficult to erase. Yu reading www.yuuganshu.com. Aztec lowered the newspaper in his hand, revealing half of his face that was originally covered, and said, "No thanks, I've already read this one, it was originally yours, and Buck has another one." Na Yuan smiled and said, "Okay. So when everyone got together for breakfast the first day, have you already established such a delicate habit? Newspapers will be circulated at breakfast." Seeing that everyone was seated, Qiao Qi took off her apron, hung it on the door handle, and said, "Everyone is here, then, let's have dinner." "Great. Of course, this is Nancy." She waited for this for a long time, and then started. The others also ate slowly. Aztec held the newspaper in one hand and drank the milk tea in the other, and praised, "Perfect craftsmanship, with the flavor of the Cloud Sea Plateau. I still have a fresh memory of the milk tea there." While eating the sandwich in her hand, Qiao Qi said in amazement, "Have you been to the Cloud Sea Plateau?" Aztec nodded and said, "Yes, it was to avoid the pursuit of the Church of the False God. It has been many years. This flavor makes me very kind." Qiao Qi said, "It seems that everyone's footprints have overlapped a lot over the years, but at that time, we didn't have time to recognize each other, and we didn't dare to recognize each other." The poisonous woman also took a sip of the milk tea and said, "Yeah, the years of hiding around like that are really unbearable to look back on, but fortunately it's over, and finally, we are finally reunited, my dear family. I don't have any time, I'm happy now." Nancy, who was busy eating, also spared some energy to cook and interjected. Just when everyone's mood was on the rise again, Na Yuan suddenly said leisurely, "Do you have any needles?"